when you want to unpack election results in any election, there is really only one man to turn to, Sir John Curtice from the University of Strathclyde. He came into the studio a little earlier at the end of his long marathon stint in covering these elections to give me his view, and up some, if you like, of the elections in the UK, minus, of course, Northern Ireland, which still has to declare.
Well, there were two contests going on Thursday. One was between the Conservatives and Brexit, and it was essentially a battle amongst Leave voters. And the question was, to what extent would Leave voters, frustrated and disappointed at the government's failure to deliver Brexit, would end up being attracted by Nigel Farage's Brexit party? Well, the answer was rather a lot. It's pretty clear that well over half of Conservative voters switched towards Nigel Farage's party, which, with the 32% or so of the vote, it got pretty much what the opinion polls expected, and the Conservatives at 9%, if anything, were doing slightly worse. So very clear that voters on the Leave side of the argument strongly punishing the government, not least because many of them actually think that leaving without a deal would be preferable than the apparent endless extension that we're involved in at the moment.
So in a sense, they accepted Nigel Farage's argument that he pushed with the Brexit party.
Yeah. On the other side of the other battle that was going on was more on the Remain side of the debate, and it was between Labour and both the Liberal Democrats and the Greens for the Remain vote. Now, here the polls were very uncertain, and most of them had said actually Labour Party should still come second, but all of them were detecting that during the course of the campaign, the Liberal Democrats and the Greens seemed to be pulling away more and more Remain voters from the Labour Party. And the question was the much clearer, definitely, we want a second referendum, and by the way, we are hoping that this will come up with a different result stance of the Liberal Democrats, the Greens and Change UK would attract voters away from the Labour Party. Well, it now looks as though it did, not to the same extent that the Brexit party has drawn away votes from the Conservatives, but because this was, in a sense, a much less anticipated result, it's perhaps come as rather more of a shock to the Labour Party, and perhaps surprise to Liberal Democrats in particular, than is true on the other side of the debate. But it does therefore mean that on the one hand, the Conservative Party is now going to have this debate: should the next Tory Prime Minister be embracing the idea of leaving without a deal? But equally, should the Labour Party now move much more clearly to saying that it's in favour of a public vote on whatever Brexit deal emerges, in order to shore up a Remain vote, which has always been the largest share of its vote, but which now seems at risk of being lost?
The Conservative leadership contender Boris Johnson was writing this morning that these results were clear, and what had to happen was that the government had to deliver on Brexit. Are they really that clear?
Well, no. I mean, it's true that around 35% of people voted for parties that were saying they would have no deal, and those undoubtedly represent a majority of Leave voters. But 35% is rather less than 50%. It's difficult to argue that this demonstrates that a majority of public are in favour. And in fact, the 33% is roughly what we know from opinion polls as the kind of proportion that's in favour of no deal. But equally, on the other side of the fence, I mean, some want to add the numbers up to say that actually 40%, rather more people voted for pro-referendum parties than for no-deal parties. Therefore, this was a mandate for a second referendum. Well, we can argue about the extent to which the SNP's vote is actually a Remain vote. It is predominantly, but not wholly. And if you take them out, actually it's 35-35. But in any event, whether it's 35 or 40, it's still less than 50%. So I think the honest truth is that neither side can claim on the basis of these results that voters have sent a clear signal. It should be one thing or the other. The signal the voters have sent on both sides of the argument is that many of them are now sufficiently polarised as to which choice they prefer, that the two, as it were, extreme options of leaving without a deal and having a second referendum, as the polls are suggesting, two most popular options, and options that about which voters feel sufficiently strongly that many a person who might otherwise be expected to vote Conservative or Labour switch to one of the smaller parties.
How worried should the Conservative Party be by this result?
Well, I mean, point one to make is that we know from the opinion polls that not as many people would vote for the Brexit party as it did in Thursday as would in general election. But we also know from the opinion polls that maybe 15, 16, 17, 18% currently would. Now, maybe that number will come down a bit as the European elections fade, except that, of course, Brexit's not going off the agenda anytime soon. And this may be a European election which gets remembered by voters rather more. And the truth is, I don't think the Conservative Party can afford the Brexit Party running at 15, 16, 17, 18%, because certainly all the opinion polls at the moment for Westminster voting intentions have the Conservative Party behind the Labour Party with no prospect of being able to form another administration. So to that extent, at least, yes, the Conservative Party do have to wait. And I think in particular, it's unlikely that that Brexit vote is going to disappear unless and until the Conservatives deliver Brexit. A second promissory note which says, look, we're better able placed to deliver this than Nigel Farage is probably not going to work, and that therefore the next Tory Prime Minister is probably going to have to try to work out a way of delivering Brexit within the arithmetic of the current House of Commons, because the option of going to the country way was unlikely to look very attractive.
Sir John Curtice there. Right, let's take a break from the politics and have a look